this video I'm going to show you how I make Copper Matte Raku. It's one of my favourite ways of glazing pottery. It's got really beautiful range of colours on it with some iridescent patches and random patterns, and no two pieces are the same. So I will show you how I make the glaze. This is the glaze. Then I'll show you how I apply it to the pots and how I fire it. If you like the video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and then when I upload a new video you'll get a notification. Thanks for watching and see you in a minute. So first of all you need some copper oxide, some bentonite and some borax for it. This is the recipe that I used with the weights and the percentages. You need a digital scale, a respirator and some water. So I put the respirator on first of all. It's important not to inhale any of the ingredients whilst they're being mixed up. Here I am weighing out the borax for it. It was 9% of the entire weight, which was 50.56 grams. And then I weigh out the bentonite, which is just 2% of the mixture, which was 11.23 grams. And then I add all of the copper oxide. That bag there is 500 grams of copper oxide. That is 89% of the mixture, and I'm just going to add it all into a small amount of water. And I'm quite careful to try and prevent any of the copper oxide from puffing up into the air as it's being dropped into the water. Even though I've got the respirator on, I don't really want it to be coming out and just going on the surfaces, nearby surfaces. So then very gently stirring the copper oxide into the water. Once the copper oxide is all mixed in, I add the borax for it, again being careful to cover it over whilst the powder is being dropped into the liquid. And just stir it in gently, and you can see there I'm using my hand to cover the top of the jar just to prevent dust getting into the atmosphere. And then the bentonite goes in, and one thing to know about bentonite is that it does swell up when it's put in liquid, so it does get a bit gloopy, and it can take a little bit of mixing. Like that. See, it gets quite thick on the spoon. So I scrape as much of the bentonite mixture off as I can from the spoon, and then I use a hand blender, just an electric hand blender. And then when all the powders are mixed in thoroughly, I add a little bit of water to make it into the consistency that I need. And ideally you want to go for something that's about the consistency of single cream, somewhere between single cream and whole milk. And then give it another whiz, and then put the lid on, and I left it to settle overnight. So the next day, before I applied it to any biscuit, I gave it a bit of a stir with a brush, and just really making sure that any of that sediment that settled at the bottom of the water is remixed into the glaze. And then just paint it onto the biscuit. It just needs one coat, and just leaving the foot of the piece clean too. So once I've put one coat on, I just go over it and look for any little areas that are looking a bit thin, or sometimes there might be tiny little speckles that haven't got glaze covering on them. So there's the two pots that I'm going to fire today. There they are in the kiln. And I'm just lighting the propane burner here. This is my Raku kiln. If you're interested in knowing how I built it, then I'll put a link in the video to another video on how I made it. So I just start it off on a relatively low flame. And then, as you can see, to the left of the kiln I've got some bricks laid out on the floor, which act like a tray really for the pottery once it's come out of the kiln. I put a layer of sand down. And then I just plan ahead and think about where I'm going to place the pots when they come out of the kiln. The temperature in the kiln is rising steadily. As the kiln is firing, I get all the other things ready that I'm going to need later on. When I've decided where I'm going to put the pottery after it's come out of the kiln, I put a little bed of sawdust down on top of the sand. And because I'm going to be lifting them out of the kiln with some Raku tongs, and I want to make sure that they don't fall over, so I'm just putting a little bed of sand down, a little bed of sawdust down, and then I made a little dip in the sawdust just to give the pot a bit of support so it doesn't just topple over, because it can be a little bit fiddly getting pots to stand up when you're lifting them with the long iron tongs. So you can see there that the kiln is getting hot. I fire the kiln up to 1055 degrees centigrade, which is 1931 degrees Fahrenheit. And then once it's reached that temperature, I turn the burner off. And then I close up the flue on the top of the kiln, and I also close up the burner port with some spare pieces of ceramic fibre. And then I just hold those pieces of ceramic fibre in place with the burner torch, which is now off. And I let the kiln cool now to 760 degrees centigrade. That just starts off the reduction process. It takes maybe about 5 minutes for it to drop to 760 degrees centigrade. And when it's done that, I lift the pots out of the Raku kiln. I carry them over to the sawdust area. Then when they're in place, I cover them up with some shredded paper and let them burn for around 30 seconds. This is called flaming. About half a minute is the ideal amount of time. It's quite difficult to get it precisely half a minute, but it's more or less half a minute. And whilst the first one is flaming, I get the second one out, and again I cover that with some shredded paper too. And whilst the second one is beginning to burn, then I get a tin, which is the reduction chamber, and put it over the first one. And it's helpful to get a tin that fits as snugly around the pot as you can get it. If you use something that's too roomy, you just don't seem to get the same sort of result. So the snugger the fit, the better. And before I put the tin over, I put a little bit more paper over and then pop the tin on top again. And then I leave it to burn for about 2 minutes, as close to 2 minutes as possible. Just sort of wiggle it down to keep the oxygen from getting in. And then after 2 minutes, you do something called burping, which means lifting the tin up and then putting it back down again to let a bit of oxygen in. This intensifies the colours of the glaze. And again, I do the same thing with the second one. I've tried to slow it down in the video just so that you can see what's happening, because actually you can really see the colours dancing across the surface of the pot. It's a bit difficult to see it on the video, but I thought I'd try anyway. I don't know whether you can see that there, but it's quite sort of spectacular to look at when you lift the lid off. And then just wiggle it down again, make sure it's sealed, and then leave it for a good hour to cool down. And then once it's burnt itself out and cooled down, then you can have a look and see what you've got. And the colours that you can see there, actually once they've been out in the air for a while, they do tend to intensify too. You can see the inside of the pot is carbonised, and as the foot is too. And this is a firing that I did the next day, and it was quite a nice piece, so I thought I'd include it in this video too. With this one you can really see the iridescent metallic patches next to the pinks and the blues, which is one of the things I love so much about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and then you'll get a notification when I upload a new video. Thanks for watching, bye!